Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. The Clarity Act could be just days away from its biggest moment yet. But here is what almost nobody is explaining properly. This is not simply another crypto bill working its way through Washington. This could determine which regulator controls large parts of the American crypto market, how exchanges are allowed to operate, how tokens are legally classified, and whether trillions of dollars from traditional finance can move on-chain with confidence. The latest draft has now emerged after months of negotiations. It combines work from the Senate Banking and Agriculture Committees, adds further consumer protections, and attempts to settle one of the most controversial issues still holding the legislation back. However, it has not passed yet, and it is not guaranteed to pass, and there is now an extremely narrow window for lawmakers to get it through the Senate. So, in today's Daily Crypto Deep Dive, we are going to explain what has changed, what could still kill the bill, which parts of the crypto industry stand to benefit the most, and why the immediate price reaction might be completely different from the long-term impact. Then, after looking at all the evidence, we are going to give you our prediction. Not just whether the Clarity Act passes, but what we believe happens to the crypto industry if it does. Before we get into it, make sure you are following Crypto News Today on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and leave us a 5-star rating. It takes a few seconds, but it helps push the show out to thousands of new listeners. Now let's get into it. The Digital Asset Market Clarity Act is designed to answer a question the United States has avoided answering properly for years. The Securities and Exchange Commission has repeatedly argued that many crypto assets fall under securities law. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission has traditionally overseen commodities such as Bitcoin and derivatives markets. But between those two regulators has been an enormous gray area. Crypto companies have often been expected to follow rules that were never written specifically for their technology, while regulators have sometimes attempted to establish their interpretation through enforcement cases after products were already launched. That has created uncertainty for exchanges, token issuers, developers, investors, and traditional financial institutions. The Clarity Act attempts to replace that uncertainty with an actual statutory framework. It would create a legal definition for digital commodities, establish a regulated spot market regime under the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and create clearer boundaries between the authority of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission. It would also introduce registration requirements for crypto intermediaries, rules around customer asset segregation, disclosure requirements, conflict of interest protections, and coordination between the two regulators. In other words, crypto exchanges operating in America would have a defined route towards becoming fully regulated businesses rather than constantly wondering whether a new enforcement case was coming. And that is where today's sponsor, Kraken, fits into the wider story. Kraken is one of the world's longest-running cryptocurrency exchanges, giving users access to Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and a wide range of other digital assets. Anyone signing up through our Kraken link and completing the required steps can also message us to enter our 20 XRP listener giveaway. The link is in the episode description. This is not financial advice. Cryptocurrency trading involves a significant risk of loss. Prices can move rapidly, you may lose some or all of the money you invest, and you should never trade with money you cannot afford to lose. Always carry out your own research and consider your own financial circumstances before making any decision. Now back to the Clarity Act. The bill has already traveled much further than previous attempts to regulate the American crypto market. The House of Representatives passed its version. The relevant Senate committees have also advanced their respective legislation, including a 15-9 vote in the Senate Banking Committee in May. The new draft now circulating is intended to combine those different pieces of legislation into something that could potentially be taken to the Senate floor. However, there is one major problem. To advance most legislation through the Senate, supporters will probably need 60 votes. That means Republican senators cannot simply pass it alone. They require meaningful Democratic support as well. And the biggest remaining disagreement is not necessarily about Bitcoin, securities law, or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. It is about political ethics. Democratic senators have demanded restrictions preventing the president and other senior government officials from personally profiting from crypto businesses, while also controlling the regulatory environment surrounding those businesses. The latest draft reportedly includes an ethics section placing limits on certain crypto-related conflicts. However, the current language would expire in 2029, would give regulators up to 1 year to implement the restrictions, and would leave enforcement largely with the Department of Justice. Critics, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, argue that the section contains serious loopholes and would not properly prevent indirect profits through family members, licensing arrangements, or affiliated businesses. Supporters of the legislation say the compromise is a major concession and argue that Democrats should not allow the ethics dispute to destroy a much larger market structure bill. That leaves the Clarity Act in an incredibly delicate position. The bill is closer to passing than comprehensive American crypto legislation has arguably ever been. But close does not mean finished. The Senate is approaching its summer recess, and once lawmakers return, attention will increasingly move towards the November midterm elections. That means the next several days could decide whether the bill receives a Senate vote in 2026 or gets pushed into another round of delays and political negotiations. So why does this matter so much for crypto? Because the biggest benefit of the Clarity Act may not be what it does to prices tomorrow morning. It is what it could allow companies to build over the next decade. At the moment, a crypto-friendly administration can appoint crypto-friendly regulators, withdraw previous enforcement actions, and adopt a more accommodating interpretation of existing law. But another administration could arrive several years later and reverse much of that approach. An act of Congress is far more durable. 21 Shares researchers have argued that this durability is the real significance of the bill. Investors can already access regulated products linked to several major cryptocurrencies. What the industry still lacks is a permanent legal structure that cannot be easily dismantled whenever the political administration changes. That distinction is enormous. A bank considering building tokenized deposit infrastructure does not want to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a system that could be challenged by the next Securities and Exchange Commission chair. An asset manager considering issuing tokenized securities does not want to discover that the legal interpretation of those assets has changed after the product has launched. A major exchange does not want to build its entire American business around guidance that could disappear after the next election. The Clarity Act would not eliminate every regulatory risk, but it would make the basic rules considerably harder to change overnight. And this is where we believe people are misunderstanding the potential winners. Bitcoin would benefit from greater institutional confidence, but Bitcoin already has the clearest regulatory status of any major cryptocurrency. The larger impact may be felt further out across the market. Ethereum, Solana, and other networks capable of hosting stablecoins, tokenized assets, decentralized applications, and institutional financial products could benefit from companies becoming more comfortable using public blockchains. The latest draft reportedly preserves protections for software developers who do not control customer assets, preventing those developers from automatically being treated as money transmitters. That distinction is critical for decentralized finance. Writing software is not the same as taking custody of someone's money. Without that protection, developers could face the same compliance obligations as financial intermediaries, even when they have no control over users' funds. The bill could also create clearer treatment for token fundraising, provide rules for exchanges and direct regulators to develop pathways for securities and futures products to operate on-chain. Miller Whitehouse Levine, chief executive of the Solana Policy Institute, said the draft could effectively give financial institutions a green light to use public blockchains while creating stronger protections for consumers and developers. That does not mean every cryptocurrency becomes legitimate. It does not mean every token is automatically declared a commodity. And it certainly does not mean regulators will stop investigating fraud, manipulation, or illegal securities offerings. In fact, a proper market structure could make enforcement more effective. When the rules are vague, bad actors can hide behind the confusion, and legitimate companies can argue that they did not understand their obligations. When the rules are clear, companies know exactly where the boundaries are, and regulators can pursue those crossing them without debating the basic legal framework every single time. But we also need to talk about the argument against the bill. Some critics believe the legislation is too favorable towards the crypto industry and could allow assets that resemble securities to escape the stronger investor protections applied to traditional financial markets. Others are concerned about conflicts of interest, weak enforcement provisions, and the political influence the crypto industry now has in Washington. Banking organizations have also raised concerns about areas including stablecoin rewards and yield products, arguing that allowing crypto companies to offer attractive returns could pull deposits away from traditional banks and reduce the money available for local lending. These concerns should not simply be dismissed. Regulatory clarity is only valuable if the resulting regulation is credible. A law that encourages innovation but leaves consumers exposed to another wave of collapses would ultimately damage the industry. Equally, regulations so restrictive that only the largest financial institutions can comply would destroy smaller competitors and hand the entire crypto market to Wall Street. The challenge is creating rules strong enough to protect customers without making decentralized technology functionally impossible to use. Now we come to the big question. What happens next? First, we believe the Clarity Act has a genuine chance of advancing through the Senate before the summer recess, but we do not believe it is anywhere near guaranteed. The industry has momentum. Republican leadership wants a vote. Several Democrats have participated in negotiations, and the merged draft shows that lawmakers are trying to find enough common ground. However, the ethics language remains a serious threat. If Democrats conclude that the current compromise is designed more to provide political cover than to create enforceable restrictions, the bill could fall short of the 60 votes it needs. Our prediction is that lawmakers reach another last-minute compromise. The ethics provision may be tightened, enforcement may be broadened, or senators may agree to revisit part of it through separate legislation. We believe the political cost of allowing the entire market structure effort to collapse is now becoming too high for both sides. But here is the more important prediction. We do not believe passage of the Clarity Act would immediately send Bitcoin up 30%. We do not believe XRP automatically doubles. And we do not believe every altcoin suddenly enters a new bull market the moment the bill is signed. There could be an initial rally. There could also be a sell the news reaction, particularly if traders have already positioned themselves ahead of the vote. The real impact would happen more slowly. During the first 6 months, we predict a wave of American exchanges, custodians, and token issuers announcing plans to register under the new framework. Legal teams that have spent years telling companies what they cannot do would finally begin explaining what they can do. During the following 12 to 24 months, we predict a major acceleration in tokenization. Stocks, bonds, money market funds, private credit, real estate interests, and other financial assets would increasingly be issued or settled through blockchain infrastructure. Banks and asset managers would begin using public networks more openly, not because they suddenly believe in crypto ideology, but because the technology could lower costs, improve settlement times, and allow financial products to operate continuously. We also predict that the biggest corporate winners would initially be the infrastructure companies, regulated exchanges, custodians, stablecoin issuers, blockchain analytics companies, compliance providers, tokenization platforms, and the networks capable of supporting institutional activity at scale. Then, over the next 3 to 5 years, the separation between crypto and traditional finance would begin to disappear. People would still talk about Bitcoin as Bitcoin, but many users would interact with blockchain technology without thinking of themselves as crypto users at all. Their bank deposits might move through tokenized rails. Their investment funds might settle on-chain. Their payments might use stablecoins behind the scenes. Their shares, bonds, or property investments might be represented by tokens even though the front-end application looks completely traditional. That is our real prediction. The Clarity Act will not be remembered because it created one enormous green candle. It will be remembered because it removed one of the biggest excuses preventing the financial system from moving on-chain. If it passes, we believe historians could eventually view it in the same category as the approval of the first American spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. Not because the entire financial world changed in a single day, but because the direction of travel became almost impossible to reverse. The spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds opened the door for institutions to own Bitcoin. The Clarity Act could open the door for institutions to build with blockchain technology. And that may ultimately be much bigger. Now we want to hear your prediction. Does the Clarity Act pass before the Senate leaves for its summer recess? Does it become one of the most important pieces of crypto legislation in history? Or has the market already priced it in, leaving traders at risk of another massive sell the news event? Let us know in the comments, follow Crypto News Today for daily coverage, and leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify. Whatever happens over the coming days, we will be covering every major development. And as always, we will see you at the top.